All right. Hello, everyone. We're going to be getting started in about 5 to 10 seconds, so please take your seats. And if you're still milling around, that's okay. Go ahead and take your seats. We're going to get started promptly in the next few moments. Hello everyone, I'm Eric Singer, live on our Gazette News Facebook platform, and what you're watching is tonight's Community Conversations. First, thank you so much for coming here. That we've been having dueling forums throughout the evening, so we appreciate what you're doing here tonight to solve the affordable housing solutions here in the Pikes Peak region. And Gazette Media and Colorado Politics are hosting this Community Conversations, again, on solutions to deal with the problematic issue of affordable housing. So with that in mind, let me introduce our editor with the Gazette, Vince Bezdek. Please, a round of applause.
Thanks for coming out on this cold night. I understand there's a wedding reception next door, so maybe we can all go there after we solve the world's problems and celebrate with them. Listen, I want to thank Laura Nelson, Peter Wasaki, Lee Patke, Steve Posey, and Joe Gabler for being here tonight. And Eric is going to give them a full introduction right before our debate begins. But I really want to thank you guys for coming out and being with us here at the Gazette. And when I say the Gazette, we don't say newspaper anymore. You probably heard Eric say media. And that's because we're more than just a newspaper now. In the digital age, the audience has become much more part of the stories we do, like you are today. The Gazette is much more a convener than a megaphone. And that's a really good thing. Events like this remind me that our whole job as journalists is to engage people, convene people, and let people know what's going on in the world so they can run that world themselves. Events like this remind me we are more than consumers defined by what we buy and sell. We are citizens. So thanks very much for coming tonight and being citizens. We really appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Vince. Round of applause. It's okay. And you know what? We'd like to thank our sponsors here tonight. This forum is sponsored by the AARP, the Springs Rescue Mission, and Family Promise. First, let's hear from AARP's Bob Murphy.
Thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. I'm Bob Murphy, the State Director for AARP Colorado. Many of you may know AARP is that large 38 million member nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works in DC on behalf of issues like healthcare, retirement savings, but we're also in your communities working on issues to help make your quality of life better. We have 700,000 members here in Colorado and 50,000 members right here in El Paso County. At AARP Colorado, we believe that the quality of life for our members starts with a dignified and affordable place to live. And this affordable, or shall we say attainably priced, housing crisis affects our members deeply, and that's why it's such a high priority for us and why we're sponsoring this event tonight. We know that this is a statewide problem. We held a statewide conference in October. We heard stories from around the state, sobering statistics like the fact that 1 in 4 renters in Colorado pays more than 50% of their income for rent. 1 in 3 children grows up in a rent-burdened household. But we also heard stories of hope. We heard about projects occurring in Pitkin County, and Eagle County, and Boulder County, and Larimer County, and some projects that are going to occur right here as presented by Sabrina Cotta with the City of Colorado Springs. Our biggest hope from community conversations like this one here tonight that bring together the public, private, and nonprofit sectors with the community members to examine the challenges and also explore solutions to this difficult problem. It is a top priority for us. We stand ready at AARP to lend our expertise and to mobilize our membership to advocate for the kind of solutions that you collectively think are best for your community. So I want to thank the Gazette for organizing this event and for allowing AARP to be one of the sponsors tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. And now Larry Yonker with the Springs Rescue Mission.
First of all, thank you, Gazette Media, and for the sponsors, to the people who put this on. This is a very important dialogue, so why would Springs Rescue Mission spend resources to be a sponsor tonight? 15 months ago, we opened an emergency shelter for the chronic homeless, which Colorado Springs and El Paso County had never had before. And last night we slept 305. So we had 200 men and we had 75 women. We opened a women's shelter because we anticipated that there'd be more need. The shelter we built was for men and women. But we anticipated there'd be more need, and so we opened up, we made a facility that had been underutilized by our addiction recovery program, and so it had 32 beds. We opened up the first night with 60 women, and we have never had less than 60 women. And most of those women are over 50 years old. This is their first time poverty and homelessness. So the situation right now is our shelters, we're full. I've got 56 people trapped in shelter right now that have jobs. We've gotten them back to work. They're working daily jobs, they're saving money, but there's no housing affordable for them. There's no workforce housing for people that are working at come and goes and 7-Elevens and those kinds of places. So 6 women and 50 men, and we need housing. And so housing is very important. You'll hear more about Springs Rescue Mission and Shelter next week in the homeless discussion. We still have more need for homelessness, but shelter is not housing. Shelter is an emergency room, and it's designed to be an emergency room. It's not designed to be a permanent place where people live. So thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much, Larry. And we are here tonight to talk about affordable housing. First, I'd like to introduce the panelists in no specific order. Go ahead and raise your hand as I introduce you. Laura Nelson, the Executive Director of the Apartment Association of Southern Colorado. Peter Wysocki, Director of Planning Development. He oversees long-range planning development review, neighborhood services, and real estate service functions of the city. He's been with the City of Colorado Springs since December of 2012. Lee Patke, Executive Director of Grecio Housing, which develops and manages affordable rentals and offers a range of resident resources to ensure that resident stability in Colorado Springs continues. The City of Colorado Springs HUD Administrator Steve Posey, responsible for program development and administration of HUD funds for Colorado Springs, and Jill Gabler, District 5 Representative on the Colorado Springs City Council. By the way, Jill Gabler was formerly served as the Development Director of Grecio Housing. So a round of applause for all of our panelists. At this point, what I want to do is I want to get some housekeeping in. First, names were selected before the event to see the order of opening and closing statements. We're giving each of them a minute. I know that they can think in their head a minute, so that's going to be good. And they'll also get 1 minute for a closing statement. Prior to the event, we received the written questions from you, and we're also taking questions from our Gazette News Facebook platform as well. I will also ask questions to our panel. So, you know what? We are ready, so let's get started. So, here's what we're going to be doing. The first person who's going to be having an opening statement, Lee Patke.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for showing up tonight and for the interest in this topic. We're really appreciative that the topic of affordable housing has come to the forefront in our community. This is a community that responds to problems and responds effectively, so it's exciting to be a part of the solutions. 1 out of every 2 renters in Colorado is cost burdened, meaning spending more than 30% of their income on their household expenses, and 1 out of 4 spend more than 50% of their income on rent. This is unacceptable. At Grecio Housing, we have 528 affordable apartment units across 24 properties. Annually, we serve 1,200 residents, including 400 children, almost 300 seniors. We have a 10-unit program for veterans, approximately 45 to 50 residents who are on housing vouchers, 12 units for formerly homeless youth, 2 emergency shelter units, and the list of special populations goes on and on. Whoever you care about in the community, they need a place to stay tonight. They need to be able to afford it. We do this by acquiring and renovating older residential properties, converting, we're in the middle of a conversion project for a office building now, new construction with mission-driven investors and management for third-party owners. We believe in an all of the above approach to solving this issue.
Thank you, Lee. Steve Posey.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So my job as the City of Colorado Springs HUD program administrator is to manage the federal funds that come into the community from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And we get those funds from three different sources. One of them is the Community Development Block Grant Program. One is the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. And the third that is most relevant to affordable housing is the Home Investment Partnership Program. And each year the city receives approximately $1 million a year in order for us to spend specifically on affordable housing efforts here in the city of Colorado Springs. So, you can imagine $1 million in a community of this size doesn't go very far. So a lot of what I spend my time doing is talking to folks like Lee Patke and other developers out there who specialize in something called tax credit financed projects. And that is the single most important way that we build affordable housing here in the city of Colorado Springs.
Thank you very much. Peter Wysocki.
Thank you, and good afternoon or good evening. Thanks for hosting this. We are often asked, what is the definition of affordable housing and why can't the city just build more of it? And when I think and discuss affordable housing, to me it's really providing attainable housing for all incomes or a spectrum of income. It's not just about the very low income. It is about the very low income, the medium income, as well as the medium or the higher levels of housing. So to me, affordable housing is not just for the homeless. It's really more about the entire spectrum of our demographics within the city. It's also about being a competitive city. When housing affordability is maintained, cities become more affordable, become more competitive in context of economic development, and a great place to live and raise families. And city cannot do it alone. City is not a housing provider. We can certainly provide a climate, an atmosphere that is favorable for development of affordable housing through our regulatory framework and incentives. We can partner with other organizations within our community to help assist funding, such as Steve described through HUD. And we can be a great resource to the developers, to the operators of affordable housing. So it is not just the city's responsibility. I believe the city is a partner and plays a very important role in it. Our policy and direction has been to convene, to participate, and to review our processes to make sure that affordable housing can be attained within the city.
Thank you very much. And Laura Nelson.
Good evening. Thanks for coming for this important discussion. First and foremost, the affordability challenge is about supply. Demand has outstripped supply for a decade, and housing prices have risen more than wages, causing housing to become increasingly unaffordable for many. Since 2011, Colorado wages have gone down while housing prices have continued to increase. To increase the development of affordable units, there must be public and private money involved. The government at some level must make housing a priority and fund it appropriately. In addition, we need to create incentives for these developments to increase the appetite for it and make the numbers work. As you can imagine, the cost of building a basic apartment is about $170,000 a unit. And in order to do that, you have to have a combination of some pretty complex funding possibilities in order to make that happen. So it's not something that we can solve overnight, but I think it's a community issue, and we're definitely going to need a community solution. Finally, we as neighbors, I believe, need to embrace a more diverse housing stock and put a stop to some of the NIMBYism that leads to higher costs for developers and in some cases can stop a development altogether. To improve this, I believe that our city can revise the appeals process that is currently being used so that market rate and affordable developments will not continue to be held hostage by the neighborhoods that they're built in. I look forward to continuing this discussion and hope that we can come up with some solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Jill Gabler.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. And thanks to the Gazette for hosting this evening. It is an important topic, and I'm honored to be a part of the conversation. I am your council member, but I think it's relevant tonight to also say that I am a utilities board member. Colorado Springs Utilities is a for-service utility here in town, and they do play a role in the affordable housing conversation. Your city council is the land use body for our whole city. We make the decisions about where housing should go, where everything should go. During my first term on council, I chaired the Infill Redevelopment Committee, which created a plan to really try to redevelop the blighted area of our community and to develop the areas that are still open. I actually brought a copy of the plan because it's very relevant. Your council deals with policy, and it is your driver for changing how we develop. And this plan has a lot of recommendations for policy changes that will help us to build more affordable housing. Right now, I also co-chair our comprehensive plan update. That is the actual plan that is the plan for development for our whole city and how we decide as a community that we want to grow. And we want to ensure that we are building the types of housing that is needed by those who live here now, but those who are going to live here for 20, 30 years to come. And so having these conversations and ensuring your council knows what's important, what you care about, and we know affordable housing is so important, that we can ensure that those types of incentives and priorities are put into that plan.
All right, thank you very much. And now let's get to our conversation. Bottom line, we've been getting questions, and I'm going to abbreviate the questions because some of the questions are a little bit long. So bottom line is, we're talking about gentrification. That's something that's been happening here in the Colorado Springs area. We've reported on it in the Gazette. Well, obviously, it has to do with housing codes. It has to do with so many other things. Let's talk about the housing codes first. Can we change some of the housing codes to make it easier to be able to put up more affordable housing? Because right now, it is a seller's market. We all know that. Buyers are, in some cases, having to go at least $10,000 over asking price if they want to even be competitive for situations. So let's start with that, and let's jump in. I'm going to say, Jill, since you were the last person talking, I'm going to have you start up first because we're talking about codes. Let's go ahead and jump in and let's let everybody round up.
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think our city is actually really open to every type of development. We have really pretty easy zoning. We do have issues, in my opinion, with how we permit sometimes with regional building. We have just created a committee to really look at how regional building department uses their permits, how we apply for permits, and how easy it is to actually develop. So your council is looking at that issue. When it comes to codes, I think there are issues when it comes to affordable housing. Right now, as part of the infill redevelopment plan, we're looking at ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, making it easier for the city to allow those types of projects. Right now, they're not allowed in every residential zone, so maybe making it easier for some of these type of projects to be built, and we are addressing that. I really think Peter should weigh in, though.
Peter.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gabler. When we talk about housing codes, to me, it's a actually very difficult topic to discuss because there's two levels. One is the land use entitlement process, which addresses zoning and city regulations like parking and setbacks and building height, etc. I can tell you that overall the city's entitlement process is fairly not as complex as some other communities in the state and certainly throughout the country. And as Councilman Gabler indicated, I think our zoning is fairly permissive when it comes to providing multifamily housing, when it comes to even providing more dense single-family residential development. I will say that over the years, we've worked very hard, very diligently to make the processes even more streamlined, allow different style of housing or different type of housing easier to maybe increase the densities. But then there's the building codes, the fire codes, the International Code Council codes, the construction codes, which are administered by the Regional Building Department, commonly referred to as the RBD. And that's a separate entity from the city, and they regulate, do plan reviews, do inspections on all new construction. So perhaps those codes are national codes, and it's very difficult for local jurisdictions to deviate from that unless there's some very specific local amendments that are approved by the by a building department or a city's governing body. The question I always ask is are there any other incentives that can be offered that can provide some gap financing or funding in order to lower the cost of construction? And we can only do so much from a regulatory standpoint. Is there other means, methods that the cost can be offset? And those are typically done through some sort of incentive programs, whether it be reduction in water and sewer tap fees, whether there's reduction in administrative fees, building permit fees, etc. So the city is looking at various, we should say that there is a council-formed committee that's reviewing affordable housing issues, and not just affordable housing, but housing affordability issues, and we're looking at different methods to help fit that gap funding.
To all of you, I mean, the one thing that you have to consider here is that all these folks are here for a reason, because they're saying, we hear that you're reviewing it. We hear that you've been talking about it. We hear this, we hear that. But when they're looking for affordable housing, they can not just see, they can hear the fact that they can't get into those housing because they can't afford it. So when do we see a less review, less talk, more action? When do we see that? I mean, is it a 6-month timetable? Is it a year timetable? When exactly is that going to happen? I mean, affordable housing has been going on in this area for at least several years. The current real estate market continues to beef up as far as $10,000 year to year. Average prices continue to go up. Let's focus on some maybe private-public partnerships. Let's talk about what HUD can do. Steve.
Well, actually, I would like to weigh in on that a little bit, because I know there is a very common perception out in the community that nothing is happening. And that simply isn't true. We're actually seeing more production of affordable housing going on in Colorado Springs right now than we have in a decade and a half. This coming year, we expect to see, and I realize that these numbers are not going to sound huge, but they actually are quite significant. We're seeing, we expect to see over 500 units come online by the end of 2018, and we're expecting another 450 to 500 units to come online in 2019. And those are housing projects that will provide much needed affordable housing for some of the most vulnerable segments in our community. And I'm talking about seniors on fixed income, the disabled, some of the homeless population. Those projects are not just being planned right now, but they are actually either in construction or about to break ground.
What kind of, when you're talking about that affordable housing, what are we talking about as far as prices? Because that's something, it's a reality check of how much can I afford? Because they're building it, but how much are they, so that I can plan accordingly in my budget to be able to make that happen?
That's right. These particular projects, particularly the ones for some of the most vulnerable in the community, are kept at very, very low income levels.
When you say low income, what's considered
Well,
low
for
income?
instance, I mean, you know, for somebody who is making potentially less than $10,000 a year.
And you know, that is an admirable goal, obviously, but let's also talk about the reality check of all the folks who are here who are trying to find affordable housing right now. Let's weigh in on nonprofits, how they can be part of this whole equation as well.
Sure, and a quick comment on those rent levels. So Steve spoke a little about what the income levels are, but part of the question was about what are the rent levels. So some standards in rents for affordable housing. We go back to that standard of charging no more than 1/3 of a person's income for rent. So if someone's making $27,000 a year, they wouldn't spend more than $9,000 a year in rent. Those maximum allowable rents are set by HUD and our other city, state, and local funding sources. So there are max allowable rents that are established at all those income levels.
Laura?
Well, Ratio is sort of the expert here on affordable housing. What I will comment on as part of the code conversation is Jill mentioned the infill committee that we were on. We made several recommendations to City Council, and I believe they passed just the utility issues that we suggested so far, and that was roughly 2 years ago. So whether it's, reducing the number of parking spots that are needed, the requirement for traffic studies that have been, city advisors have said there's no longer a need for those traffic studies, they're just an additional cost. Park fees for developments where there's no land to build parks, so there shouldn't be a fee attached to that. Some of those things, along with the appeals process that I mentioned earlier, were all suggested by the infill committee 2 years ago. So we would love to see, from the private side, some of those things come to fruition.
So Jill, she was asking you specifically on the city council, what's the holdup? She's not the problem. We're not singling out Jill Gaylor. She's nice enough to be here.
So as
But-
Laura mentioned, we have moved forward several of the recommendations from the infill and redevelopment plan. And I might add, Laura was on that committee too. Everyone up here overlaps greatly. We all work together, have worked together in the past because we've been working on these issues for some time. There still are a couple issues coming out of utilities. I mentioned the accessory dwelling units. We are about to make a change there that when someone adds an accessory dwelling unit, a mother-in-law house, an apartment on their land, they immediately get charged the commercial rate for water. We're changing that so they will be charged the residential rate. It may seem like a small thing, but getting one more person into an affordable apartment, affordable house is the key. We are now going to be looking at that, the ADUs at the city side to maybe relax the zoning, allow them in more types of zones. Right now we don't allow them in all residential zones. Let's see, Laura mentioned parking. We are working on trying to reduce the number of parking slots that apartments need in certain areas. And I should mention that we want to incentivize the type of multifamily housing that is along transportation corridors so that people who are spending a third of their income on rent aren't also spending a ton of money on transportation. We want to support people at all levels. And so trying to incentivize this kind of building along transportation corridors, employment areas, downtown is a key for us, and trying to reduce the number of parking slots that they have, working on donated land, where we try to work with public-private partnerships. I have trouble with that phrase. With organizations like Ratio, but not just Ratio, to help offset the cost of development. Land is a huge cost of building a project. And so trying to find those areas of where we can find those donations, any type of incentive that can help reduce the cost of a development. We really are working at that at the city. And she mentioned the appeals process, we're working on that too.
All right, let's let Lee go in, and then it's going to be Peter. Go ahead.
So Jill just mentioned the cost of land. There was a recent study, and I'm happy to share the links, that was put out that said 75% of the cost of housing of new construction for affordable rentals are land, materials, and labor. All three of those have risen greatly in our area over the last number of years. Another part, we go back to the timing issue. Some of these can have an immediate impact. If we acquire and renovate a property, we can go from acquisition to being stable and fully occupied in a matter of months. What we're trying to do, and what you see around the country, is the face of affordable housing has changed. It's no longer the tenements that you see in downtown big cities. It's no longer the projects. That's got a really negative connotation. But for an entire application process to put it together, to get all the entitlements done through city planning, and then a construction time, the reality is for affordable housing, that's years. So it's great that we've got these, the funds and the projects online now, but we're fighting today's battles for projects that will come online in 2, 3, and 4 years from now.
Peter?
We mentioned the land cost, and we certainly recognize that land cost is a significant factor in providing any housing stock, whether it be for, very low income to the medium income families that are trying to purchase just a standard 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-car garage, because those prices are beginning to escalate and creep up slowly, and now we're finding that families just having a hard time being able to qualify to purchase single-family homes. But I just want to clarify one thing on parking. The city council actually did pass a parking revision or an ordinance revising the city's parking ordinance that allows, for example, and this is one of the changes, that if there's available on-street parking, then that on-street parking can count towards the required parking for that project. And I want to put this into perspective. When you have a 1 acre or 2 acre piece of property, and city code requires all the parking to be provided on the site itself. So when you add that requirement, and the parking standards depend on number of units and how many bedrooms are in each unit. By the time you do that, by the time you provide the landscaping, by the time you provide fire accessible routes, you really run out of land to actually build the housing units. So many cities, including City of Colorado Springs, reviewed our parking standard, that if you're next to transit, if you're next to trails, if there's on-street parking, why don't we just reduce the parking so that there's more land available to build more units? However, that does have some neighborhood impacts, and that's when we get into neighborhood discussion and potential neighborhood opposition, that additional housing is going to then impact our street. I will not be able to park my car, or my friends won't be able to park their car when they come visit. So it sounds very simple, but it's not, because it is about providing some incentives or removing some barriers, but also we have to remember that there's development going into an existing neighborhood. So it's a very, very fine balancing act.
And you bring up some interesting points, specifically about incentives, about bringing neighborhoods together and also going into other neighborhoods. When you put it in perspective, though, in a recent community conversations, we spoke with folks on the southeast side who were saying, hey, we're like left out in the lurch. We're not part of this conversation. We have buildings on the southeast side that are commercial buildings that are sitting vacant, doing nothing. They're part of, you were talking specifically on bus routes. Okay, that's one. You were talking about major thoroughfares. Well, that's Academy. So with that in mind, can't we somehow entice builders and change things instead of the 2 to 3 years, which is normal government process? Let's be realistic. Everyone would be the same people who would complain. They go, well, why didn't you study this? And then the same people who complain, you overstudy this. So you can never find that happy medium. But couldn't we find some kind of builder, public-private partnership that would say, let's do something on the southeast side? Example, downtown Denver. I'm a Colorado native. I remember when the downtown Denver Lodo was terrible. You would never go down there for any other reason other than you absolutely positively have to, or you work downtown. Now, it is the place to be. It's got the Rockies. It's got everything and anything imaginable. And housing prices continue to go up in that area. It became a place to be. Could we not do that with the HBA, Home Builders Association, and other entities? What do you think?
Absolutely, and I think, I know developments and plans are being made right now for the southeast part of Colorado Springs. What we can't do is concentrate all the services to low income in certain areas in an effort to insulate other parts of the city. We have to have affordable housing in all areas of the city because those service sector jobs serve all sectors of the city. Those conversations are happening now, and there's a tendency at times to say, well, let's make this thing happen or make that thing happen. Let's talk about inclusionary zoning, which is not really realistic. But our response is, get us to the table. Let's talk to the employers. We have a case to be made for affordable and proximal housing to work areas to make sure that the workforce is stable, present, on time. That's important to our workforce. And those conversations are happening in Southeast Colorado Springs, and I think you'll see more of that and the product of that in the coming years.
Steve's shaking his head yes. Let's talk about that, Steve.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that one too, because we are looking currently at some projects that will take currently vacant buildings, not exclusively in the southeast, but also to the east of downtown, and repurpose them for residential use and for affordable housing in the community.
Steve, when you say affordable housing, a lot of folks here maybe are in the middle class, we'll say in that middle class. Is that affordable housing too? Because they don't want to be left out in the lurch because they can't afford what's currently out there. The under $200,000 range, for example, in Pikes Peak Multiple Listing Service and PPAR, they have less than a month's supply. They can't afford to get in there and they can't afford to wait.
Right, and most of the projects that we're looking at currently are multifamily projects. They're not necessarily single-family projects. One of the things, just to circle back to the issue of land for a minute, in conversations that I've had with some of the other developers in the community, it's difficult if you're looking at revitalizing certain parts of the city, it's difficult to put together parcels that are big enough to really do a project that would make a lot of units available and affordable all at once. So what we are instead looking at as a strategy now is a number of scattered site type of projects where we can provide 18 units in one location or 25 units in another location. And interestingly, that happens to make up a large amount of the so-called affordable housing stock across the country. And that's something that I just found out within the last day or two.
Peter?
Well, I would like to echo what Steve and Lee indicated. I think when you look at the most successful cities that have successful affordable housing, that the affordable housing is decentralized. It is not in one part of the city. And we are seeing a lot of growth in the north part of the city, a lot of service sector jobs, nurses, and if you provide all affordable housing in one area of the city, then there's transportation issues become, or transportation becomes an issue. So really the effort should be a citywide program. I can tell you that anytime we have a potential developer or a landowner that it comes into the planning department's offices to either discuss, potential projects that they're thinking about, we promote fresh ideas, whether it be affordable housing, whether it be mixed-use development, whatever it may be. We are very open, and I believe we do a fairly good job at supporting projects that are either provide housing through higher density. Now this newer product, or the developers are calling it detached townhomes, because there's an issue with construction defect laws and lawsuits. So they create smaller units and they separate and they sell them as individual units. So even those are becoming more and more expensive. So we are very open. We certainly promote the Southeast as much as we possibly can. But there also has to be a willing seller. The owners of those older shopping centers that are now 30, 40 years old, the debt has been paid off. They also provide a certain service to the mom and pops little businesses that may not afford a higher lease payment commercial property. So once again, it's a balancing act. But I think we do a very good job at trying to promote the Southeast downtown at any form of development.
But the only reason I brought that up is because there's more growth potential in the southeast section. For example, in the northwest part of Colorado Springs, it's going to be more difficult because guess what? There's no land. I mean, the homes are built there. You're not going to tear down the homes that people own to be able to put up new homes there. So that's the only reason I brought that up. Go ahead.
The other issue that's present in the southeast part of Colorado Springs, there is a certain amount of naturally occurring affordable housing in that area. The problem, and it's not exclusive to the southeast, but it's certainly present there, is that a lot of that housing is substandard. There are city codes for habitability, but that's an issue for some of the renters in that area, that the housing standards are some of the owners they try to put minimum investment into those properties.
Slumlords, let's just call it what it is.
Well, you can call them that. They're co-landlords. We want them held to the same standards that we are.
And Council is bringing forward some code enforcement ordinances within the next couple months that should really help enforce our current code around all multifamily housing.
Here's a question from one of our people out in the audience, and I think it's a really interesting one since we're springboarding into it from what we've just been talking about. What is the policy on establishing low-income housing in high-poverty locations? Is that, who said that was mine? Okay, well, it was a good question, I liked it.
Well, I referred to that already. Low-income housing serves low-income people. These are people. They're not criminals. They're not homeless. Once they're in a home, they're not homeless. So we have service sector jobs in all parts of the community. We need to have housing that's proximal to those jobs so they can have access to them.
Yeah, I do want to talk just a little bit about that because I think, unfortunately, this is one of those situations where one federal regulation doesn't necessarily fit with another. When you're talking about tax credit financing, yes, people who are doing tax credit developments can get a boost in the amount of funds that are available for that project if they locate them in a low-income neighborhood. By contrast, one of HUD's goals, which is the funds that we typically are talking about dealing with for affordable housing here, is to see that housing distributed throughout the community. And that's a very important, I think in many respects, that is the overall goal, as opposed to locating projects in one specific area.
Laura, I see you writing furiously. Go ahead. I'd like to hear what you have to say and what you were writing.
Well, what I was thinking is,
Here,
number
don't look
one,
over her shoulder. If I was a proctor in a law school test, I'd be counting you out and getting you out of here.
I want to point out that the slumlords are not members of ours, first of all. So I didn't feel a need to defend them because they're not a member of ours. Our mission is to educate and advocate for rental housing, and our members are not any of those folks. The other thing I was thinking is that in the past, some of the policies that Steve just mentioned, I know have caused issues with some affordable projects that may have come to fruition had those policies not been so stringent about where we put them. And when you're in sort of a crisis mode like we are, we may be at a point where any housing is better than no housing, irregardless of where it's placed. I absolutely agree with Lee and Steve that to sort of put it all over the community is best because these people work all over the community. However, I think sometimes the red tape prevents us from getting where we need to be, because we get wrapped up in the details sometimes. So I know there were times in the past where we returned money to HUD because we couldn't find the right developments in the right area. And I just think that's a tragedy to return money when we're...
And Jill, and then Peter, because when you were talking about stifling, Peter was grimacing. So I'd like to hear from him after Jill.
Well, I guess I want to correct one thing. You mentioned something about there not being land in the Northeast. There's plenty of land in the Northeast.
Northwest.
Northwest, I meant Northwest, I'm sorry. In fact, we approved an affordable housing project in the northwest part of town within the last 6 months. We've approved a ton of student housing in the northwest part of town over the last couple of years. And it really doesn't matter what kind of multifamily housing you're trying to build, whether it's already zoned for multifamily. Whenever you're trying to build in an established area of town, in a neighborhood, there's going to be a fight. Nobody wants change in their neighborhood. Nobody wants a different type of housing product in their neighborhood. Very few people want mixed types of neighborhoods where you have some small commercial in their neighborhoods. But we know that building multiple types of housing, multi-use properties in a neighborhood is what's best for our community. It promotes walkability, it promotes bikeability, It gets people out, it gets people talking to their neighbors, and we as a city are trying to prioritize that type of development. So it's important that we remember that we have infill areas all over our city that are already zoned to be built for multifamily. We just have to, as a city, acknowledge that it's important and allow it to be built. And that would be the first step to getting some of these affordable housing projects done. Because as Laura said, it's a supply issue mainly. And if you can even build any multifamily, you will get some of those folks who are sitting in affordable housing properties right now to move up and then create space for people who really need that housing.
So Peter, is Pikes Peak Regional Building and the city stifling this? I mean, because that was basically what was implied.
Well, I thought she was my friend. I think she meant federal red tape, not city red tape. I hope that's what she meant. But certainly there's, look, development is about, time is money. Development is about, at least have certainty on return on investment. And we recognize that. And I guess Councilwoman Gabler just basically said what I was going to say, is that it comes down to making hard decisions. And if the city's policy and direction is to provide a wider range of housing types, provide more affordable housing, we know that we don't build affordable housing, that we have to partner with organizations like Gracio and others, and private sector developers to provide apartments and other type of single-family housing. From a political perspective, there has to be a decision made that if we are saying that, we should vote like that. And I guess I can't put it more bluntly than that. But it certainly is those land use decisions are not easy. And I would agree with Laura that any affordable housing that's being provided, built by for-profit or not for-profit organizations is better than not having built at all.
So how do we get that, how do we make that happen? I mean, we're talking about the fact that how do we get builders to be enticed that they say, I mean, really, when you're thinking about it, it's about making a profit. We're a capitalist society. Let's be realistic, okay? So with that in mind, how do we get the HBA and others on board to be able to do that, to entice it? Is it with city money, state money, federal money? What do we do, Steve?
Well, that is the $64 million question right there, isn't it?
And I believe you can answer it. I have every faith in you.
We are taking a very close look. And actually, first of all, I have to back up because as the person who's here with the federal money, I've got to defend myself. Yeah, I know. I know that we have red tape. I know that we have confusing regulations. I know that, when you start talking about HUD, people just roll their eyes and think, oh my gosh, what's going to come down the pipe next? But the reality here is that these funds are really the key to currently these funds are the key to getting these things built in the community. And we do have, typically our development partners are developers who've made a very deliberate business decision to produce housing according to this particular finance model. And one of the things that we need to do, and that we are actively engaged in doing now, is trying to enter into conversation and actually already talking with local developers who are willing to look at that model and figure out whether or not it will work for them.
First-time home buyers. We're talking about first-time home buyers' money. There is bond money available. Can we make that more available to a larger swath of people? In other words, people who are not just first-time home buyers, maybe people who are jumping back and they don't meet that criteria. Because that's one thing, that down payment can be very difficult, especially in a larger property. Yes, you can find different programs that'll do this or that, but typically you want a certain formula that you will feel comfortable with when you're actually paying for that month to month, when you're paying that mortgage note. What do you see as the future for increasing that kind of city, state, federal partnerships? Jill?
I honestly don't know much about bonding for first-time homeowners, so it's not something that or any type of homeowner. What I can say in this regard is those who are moving out of apartments or rental properties and want to have that first home are usually trying to buy something small. And Peter mentioned earlier the construction defect issue we're having, that our developers are not building condominiums, townhouses, because we have a very litigious situation in the state of Colorado that is making it too expensive to get insurance for those type of properties. And so, again, your infill plan has taken steps to try to mitigate those issues, but we still have a huge issue in our community. We're still not building those type of products. And so if we want folks, again, to move from rental into home ownership, we need to do what we can to reduce those barriers. And then, of course, those who need affordable housing can then move into those properties.
Now, the city of Colorado Springs is typically a leader in so many different ways. What can we do as the city of Colorado Springs to reduce the problems that you're talking about? Yes, that's a state issue, of course it is, but is there a way that we can think of workarounds to be able to make sure that maybe there's a different way to work around those material construction defects? Workarounds, please.
Well, we have already done what we can at the city. We've passed an ordinance to do just that, but it really is a state issue, and it's not going to get completely resolved until the state acts. As far as rental properties, I do think that there are tools your city could use to reduce the cost, the price point for developers to produce affordable housing. You know, whether we're willing to do that, I think Lee mentioned inclusionary housing. I don't think your city council supports those types of tools. I think we have to remember that any time we try to force a developer to pay into a fund to build certain types of projects, someone else is going to pay for it. They're not going to pay for it. The other person buying the house or the other property is going to pay more for that. So somebody's already paying, and we have to decide as a community, how do we collectively want to pay more to provide affordable housing? And it should be shared. It shouldn't be just owned by those folks who then buy into that apartment property where 10% of the units are set aside for affordable housing. We should all share that burden, whether it's through a tax. I don't know. We can do things as a city to incentivize. We have urban renewal processes right now. When we approve a developer to come in and use urban renewal, which is a current tool, we could ask them to use part of that additional sales tax that they're receiving for those projects to build affordable housing. I could support that. That would be a good maybe tool, don't you think, Peter?
I have a question before, as you continue on, and I want to jump. This is just going to be my informal poll. Ready? I love informal polls. Not scientific, not the real deal. Councilmember Gabler was talking about how we all have to buy in. I want you to raise your hand. Would you be okay with a 1 cent extra tax to be able to deal with this affordable housing? Raise your hand, yes. Okay. Now, who would not, and don't worry if you want to do this, it's totally fine. We're not showing this on our Gazette News Facebook platform. Who does not want to pay that extra cent? And it's totally fine. Okay? I just wanted to, this is an informal poll, not scientific, not anything. Okay.
I think, just so we're clear, and I'll finish with this.
Sure.
The 1% tax won. It did, it won.
Just a quick note to clarify, because in our community conversations, occasionally this idea of inclusionary zoning gets tossed around. Inclusionary zoning, the concept of that is that a developer or a builder is required to set aside a number of units for affordable housing to get their market rate housing done. That there's been a decision that that's against our state constitution. There's a constitutional, some language in there against rent controls. And there was a decision by the Colorado Supreme Court called the Telluride decision that says inclusionary zoning is effectively rent controls. So anytime we're talking about that, about getting developers to do more, it does need to be incentive-based. It can't be a requirement. That's number one. Secondly, another thing, just jumping back a little bit, there's another piece another element that's going on in our state and across the country. In the last 60 years, our housing sizes have gone on average from 1,000 square feet to almost 3,500 square feet, while our average household size has gone from, you're laughing.
No, he's agreed.
Oh, we agree. Has gone from about 3.5 people to about 2.5 people. So there's something else going on out in our society and the wishes of the people that live in the community. It's not only about making more small 2-bedroom homes.
Laura, you want to respond? And then
We've all got 6 dogs now.
6 dogs, there we go. We add the 6 dogs to the equation as well.
I was just going to add to that, I think a similar study found also that more people are owning multiple homes. And so there's just less stock out there for people to buy when we're talking about buying homes. But I think incentives are definitely the way to go. I'm not a fan of inclusionary zoning. I don't feel like when you have a community problem, I don't think developers should be the only ones paying for the problem. And Jill knows I've said it in a million different ways. You know, when someone needs a car dealerships don't have to give away a free car because they're making money on 2 or 3 other cars. And so by the same token, I don't think that the multifamily or the development community should be the only ones taking the hit on something that I think is a community-wide issue.
Let's do a lightning round because we're about to wrap up and I want to make sure that you get your full amount so you can be able to do your closing statement. We'll do a lightning round of questions, okay? You ready? It's going to be 30 seconds. And you know in your head you can do it in 30 seconds. Come on. 30-second elevator speech. Question. How is a low-income tax credit working and to what extent is it solving the problem? Who wants to tackle it? Lee was first.
Not enough. We need more.
That was 10 seconds. That was amazing. He deserves a round of applause on that one. Come on.
I think we're using it as effectively and as we can in the city of Colorado Springs. We have very little tax dollars, as you know, to put toward these types of efforts. We have trouble just paving your roads. So I think every dollar we spend so well, and we try so hard to use your federal and state and local tax dollars to the best we can.
Steve.
Well, I will add to that the tax credit program did survive the last round of tax reform at the federal level. So we're all breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief over that. But it is very, very important for the community as a whole to communicate to your elected representatives, and I mean at the state and at the federal level, how important those programs are to addressing problems like this here at home in Colorado Springs.
Laura.
I agree with all of them, and we need more funding at the federal level because even though the program is still alive and well, I do think that it's not increasing at the level it needs to. So it should be the amount of money should be going up each year to meet the demand.
Peter.
I agree with everything they said.
He was amazing, wasn't he? Come on, he was amazing. Okay. This is going to be our last question on the lightning round, all right? What can be done to reduce the risk of eviction? What can help those who are evicted? Peter.
Well, reduce the risk of eviction, meaning
I think they're
for
not
non-payment or for poor housing quality.
I'm going to say, why don't we take it, they didn't give specificity. I'm going to say, obviously if you don't pay, you got to get evicted. We know that. But is there a change or some help as a stopgap measure? Because, yeah, you're evicted, but now where do you go? I mean, you know, that might be a thought. Is there something that can be found as a middle ground to be able to deal with that situation? Sort of a, you know, as we're talking about affordable housing, you're evicted because you can't pay. Well, where do you go, etc.
Yeah, I will defer that probably to others on the panel, quite honestly, since, quite honestly, the city's planning department, our code enforcement division, we don't deal with the private renter, tenant type or situations, so I'll just defer to others if there's some other financial offers that are available.
So we know that so many people in our community become homeless because of one medical issue or one car breaking down and they can't make their rent payment and they end up on the street. So anything we can do to help them get through that crisis is good. As I already said, the city has no money. But we do know, and we partner with a lot of nonprofits that already provide those types of services, help folks to pay their rent for a month. And I told Lee I wanted to go first because I know he's going to talk about what Grescio does. And the city needs to continue to partner with organizations like Grescio that provide these types of services and help people to not become homeless in the first place, which is such a huge goal for our community.
This topic could occupy our whole hour. So I'm going to leave the eviction portion aside. We are doing some great things with helping those people through grant dollars to get through those one-time life crisis events. Check us out on greshia.org. Other than that, Council President Skorman is leading a group right now with a number of very effective collaborative nonprofits that are putting together a plan to try to help the next Emerald Towers situation, where it's not about evictions, it's about people having their leases non-renewed. That's an important distinction. And so we're trying to help. We can help. We need to be brought to the table with those people that are changing the use of their apartment properties and working together with the capacity that we already have.
All right, and now let's go. Oh, did you want to respond, please?
Yeah, what we're doing as an industry is we educate, obviously, our members on the eviction process. And what we're doing is working with a lot of the nonprofits that can help do that stopgap. So when a manager is about to evict someone for non-payment, and they know that it's a short-term deal, you know, they had a medical bill or what have you, they weren't just being irresponsible, which does happen often. But when it's a life crisis, car breaks down, medical bills, what have you, then they have a list of resources that they can give to that resident and say, this might be able to help you, they might be able to get funding to cover that, and then they can avoid that eviction altogether. Because I assure you, landlords don't like to evict people. It's very costly. Re-renting that unit is not easy. So I think it's it's a win-win situation, and we are serving with Richard Skorman, trying to find units when the gentrification, for lack of a better word, happens, so that we can find units for folks.
And hopefully that answers your question, and if you have further questions and you want answers, of course, after our community conversations, please don't hesitate to reach out to the people who've just answered those questions for you. So at this point, let's go ahead and go with our closing statements. And once again, this was in no order. It was drawn out of a hat. I had absolutely, positively nothing to do with it. So with that in mind, Laura Nelson, Executive Director of the Apartment Association of Southern Colorado.
Again, thank you all for being here. I appreciate being part of this conversation. As you can probably pick up on, we've all had this discussion many times in many different forums. There are a lot of folks in the city and in the private sector working to solve this problem. We're trying to come up with the best solutions possible. So just keep that in mind, that there are a lot of folks working on this very issue. But I do think that supply is going to be the answer. So if we can come up with incentives, if we can decrease costs to development, if we can find a way to reduce the amount of pushback from neighborhoods, I think that we can go a long way to adding supply, which will in turn help with the affordability.
Peter Wysocki.
Thank you once again for joining us and inviting us to speak on this very important topic. We're maturing as a city, and we have some great opportunities before us, and affordable housing, I believe, is one of those opportunities. I'm a fan, I'm a supporter of as we commonly use it in our business, carrot versus a stick. I think you hear a very common theme here, that the best approach is through partnership, is through incentives, and there could be a number of different levels of incentives. There could be direct financial incentives, indirect financial incentives, supporting projects through allocating HUD grants. But really, it comes down to our willingness to really tackle this issue. I think the time is right that we've discussed this topic. I've been here with the city for 5 years, and it's certainly been on the forefront for the last 5 years. I think everybody is anxious to get things done, get things implemented, and we should offer as many tools as possible, look at opportunities, not shy away from difficult decisions, and really entice local developers and non-local developers to come to our community to build affordable housing at all income levels.
Councilmember Gagel.
Peter's right. Colorado Springs is a great city, but I do think for us to really become a world-class city, we have to do a better job supporting all of our community members. And to do that, we can't really separate the affordable housing issue from the homeless issue. And I think Eric mentioned there are several events going on tonight. One of them is a homeless event. And Councilmember Geislinger asked me to make a plug for really having us work better together. And I think that that is a message we have to take away tonight. There will be an affordable housing project that comes to your neighborhood. They'll come to all of our neighborhoods. And so I think it's important for all of us to at least try to be open-minded and remember that we are all in this together. We are one community of many amazing neighborhoods that are the building blocks of our great city. And we are all in this together, and we need to work together to solve this problem and our homelessness problem.
Steve Posey.
Yeah, I would like to echo the voluntary piece of this because I think it really speaks to the exceptional character of this community. You know, when Laura mentioned that President Scorman has brought together a group of people to talk about how to deal with folks who may suddenly be losing their housing and didn't expect to. That effort is entirely voluntary, and some of her member property managers and apartment owners they care about what happens to people in the community, and they want to find solutions that are voluntary in nature and that and ways for them to exhibit that caring. And that's a really important thing because you know, we heard in the intro, we need to work on a collective solution. We heard about running the world ourselves. And despite what some folks may believe, that's really consistent with what HUD wants us to do. That's really consistent with the direction that we have from the feds about, okay, Colorado Springs, we're going to make $1 million a year available to you to use for affordable housing purposes. How you do it is up to you. And that's a really important message, I think, for people to take away from this conversation this evening.
Lee Patke.
Thank you, and I truly appreciate working with everybody in this community and the people on this panel. Joe Gabler just mentioned being a world-class city. Thinking big means that we need to think of all parts of our community. One population, one term that we didn't talk about much tonight is who are the people? They're not defined by their income. They're not defined by the area of town they live. These are people. They're people that are working hard at jobs, that have kids, that have dreams. Those of us in the room that have higher than area median incomes, we have more choice. We have more power. The folks that we're serving and the folks that we're fighting for are the ones that don't have the resources, that depend on us to speak for them at events like this. Please get us to the table, and if you're not going to help, if this isn't your mission, please don't be an obstacle.
Please give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you all for being here. And if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. I remember learning that in the 70s. And with that in mind, we are ending our community conversations, and we want to appreciate the folks up here and the folks here in our studio, in our regular audience, and also the folks on our Gazette News Facebook platform who have attended this. And I'd like to remind you that we'll have full coverage on this in the Gazette and on Gazette.com. Our city reporter, Conrad Swanson, is going to write a story on this and get more comments from you as well. I know he's being put on the spot. He's going, oh gosh, you're talking about me. But Conrad Swanson will be talking about this. And I'd also like to remind you and invite you to next week. We're talking about another subject, homelessness. Same place, same time. It's going to be Wednesday, the 28th. It's going to be right here at the Pinery on the Hill. We invite you to watch from our Gazette News Facebook platform. Doors open at 5. 6 o'clock is when our conversations start. So thank you so much for being here. And of course, we at the Gazette are here for you. We tackle the tough issues. We don't just talk the talk. We walk the walk. Thank you so much for watching.